The steak was still sizzling in the pan when I saw the message. I hadn't meant to read it. Her phone lit up on the counter behind me as I was seasoning mine. I wasn't snooping, but the words were just there, like the universe shoved them in my face. I wish you were more like him. That was it. No emoji. No context. Just those 7 words, sent to someone saved in her contacts as J. Blackheart, with the kind of heart no husband should ever see. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't finish cooking either. I turned off the burner, plated the steak half-raw, and set the pan in the sink with a loud clang. Then I picked up her phone, still glowing, and placed it dead center on the dining table. Face up. Open screen. Truth on display. I didn't say a word when she came downstairs. I was in the armchair, staring out the window, chewing the inside of my cheek raw. She passed behind me, heading to the kitchen. 2 seconds of silence. Then the pause. Then the sound of her picking it up. Then a breath. I didn't look at her when she said, "It's not what you think." But that was the problem, because it was exactly what I thought. She went quiet. The kind of quiet that hums like electricity before a storm. She walked out the front door barefoot and didn't come back for an hour. When the door opened again, I didn't move. She stepped inside, her voice ready to speak. Maybe to lie. Maybe to twist it all into something else. But then she froze. Because someone else was in the room. He was standing just behind me. And the look on her face, it wasn't confusion. It wasn't guilt. It was terror. She didn't say a word. Not even a stutter. Her mouth was slightly open like she'd forgotten how to form syllables. Her eyes flicked between me and the man behind me, and that was all I needed to know. She knew exactly who he was. And yet, she hadn't expected to see him here. Not like this. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew the moment the front door opened earlier, an hour before she returned. The slow creak, the soft tread of dress shoes, too polite to be a break-in, too familiar to be cautious. He walked into my house like it belonged to him. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He simply stepped inside, took off his coat, and stood behind me in the hallway like he'd done it before. I sat motionless on the couch as he loomed in my periphery. There was no need to ask who he was. The message on her phone gave me everything I needed. I wish you were more like him. Not some celebrity. Not some fictional character. No. He was real. Physical. Close. Mallory dropped her purse, and it landed with a dull thud on the floor. Still, she said nothing. Her brain was clearly racing, calculating how to spin this, how to pivot, but her face betrayed her. There was too much panic there. Too much truth bleeding through the cracks. I stood up slowly and finally turned to face the man. He was older than me, probably mid-40s. Tailored coat, crisp shirt, expensive shoes. His expression was calm, too calm, like this was a meeting he'd prepared for, not some ambush. His hands were folded neatly in front of him. The kind of posture a man holds when he knows he's not in danger. Like he's untouchable. "Mallory," he said, with a tone that somehow made my stomach churn. Casual. Rehearsed. Soft like he knew her intimately more than I ever had. She blinked twice and whispered his name. Jared. So that was him. J. Blackheart. And suddenly the text wasn't just a gut punch. It was a window. A portal into the life she'd been living without me. She wasn't just wishing for something else. She'd found it. She'd chosen it. And now he was here, bold enough to step through the front door of my home and stand silently behind me like this was his place too. "You invited him?" I asked. My voice cracked on the last word, more out of disbelief than emotion. I wasn't sad. Not yet. I was still stuck somewhere between numb and weightless, like my body hadn't caught up with my mind. She finally stepped forward, hands up like she could somehow put the moment back together with just gestures and half-truths. "No, Emery, listen, I didn't know he'd come. I didn't tell him to come here, I swear." But Jared didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "I figured it was time he knew," Jared said calmly. "No more games. Right, Mal?" He called her Mal. A name I hated. A name I'd never used. I looked back at her. I wasn't waiting for a confession. I wasn't hoping for a denial. I just wanted to see if she'd crumble or continue pretending. But she didn't crumble. Instead, she did something far worse. She turned around and walked back out the door, leaving me alone in the room with him. When Mallory stepped out the door without a word, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like strategy, like she'd thrown a smoke grenade and slipped out through the confusion. I stood there in a bizarre kind of stillness, waiting for the panic to rise, waiting to feel something sharp, but all I got was static, a low hum of unreality. The man she called Jared hadn't moved. He was still standing at the edge of the living room like he was waiting for a signal. I finally broke the silence. "You've got 5 seconds to explain what you're doing in my house before I call the cops." He didn't even flinch. Instead, he walked over to the armchair opposite mine, adjusted his cuffs like we were about to have a business meeting, and calmly sat down. His tone was level, deliberate, like this wasn't the first time he'd had to do something like this. "I'm not here to fight you," he said, looking directly at me. "I'm not sleeping with your wife." The words hit me like a misfired punch. I was expecting confrontation. I was expecting a smug admission. But not that. Then what the hell was that text? I asked, my voice rising without permission. "The one where she said she wished I was more like you. The black heart next to your name. The way you walked in here like you owned the place." Jared gave a small, bitter smile. Not the kind that held amusement. The kind that carried years. "She and we've known each other since we were kids. I was her brother's best friend." Brother? That was news to me. I never even knew Mallory had a brother. She'd always claimed to be an only child. Suddenly, my mind was tripping over itself, trying to reconcile all the conversations we'd had, all the family stories she didn't tell. "I'm sorry," Jared said, voice low. "Her brother died when she was 19. Motorcycle crash. She never talks about it. Not to anyone. Not even you, apparently." I felt like I'd been slapped in the face by a ghost. She used to lean on me, back then. A lot. And about 6 months ago, she reached out again. Just out of nowhere. Said she was feeling lost. Said you two weren't talking. She didn't tell me much, only that she couldn't breathe in the life she was living. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, eyes heavy. "I never touched her. I never crossed the line. But I didn't push her away either. I thought I was helping. I didn't know she was telling you she was working late or going to book club. I didn't know she was using me like a shield." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to call him a liar. But something about the way he looked, tired, older than he should have been, like he'd aged more from guilt than time, stopped me. "So why come here?" I asked. "Why now?" Jared's jaw clenched for the first time since he walked in. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, weathered envelope. He set it on the coffee table between us. "Because you deserve to know who she really is. And because the last time I saw her like this was right before she disappeared for 3 days and came back engaged to you." I stared at the envelope. And for the first time since I read her message on that phone, I felt fear. Not heartbreak. Not anger. Fear. Because there was something inside that envelope that had the power to change everything I thought I knew, not just about Mallory, but about the entire foundation of my life. I stared at the envelope like it might detonate. It was yellowed around the edges, soft and worn, like it had been handled too many times by someone too afraid to open it. I didn't reach for it right away. I just sat there, breathing through my teeth, trying to make sense of what Jared had said. Mallory disappearing before we got engaged? She told me it was a wellness retreat. 3 days in the mountains with no signal, summary said her therapist suggested. I never questioned it. I even packed her bag. But now? I was wondering what else I'd unknowingly packed for her to run away from. "You're saying she came back from being with you, and then said yes to me?" I finally asked, my voice cracked and brittle. "No," Jared said. "I'm saying she left me shattered and silent. And 2 weeks later, I saw your engagement photos on her Facebook like I'd never existed. That envelope." He motioned to the table. "It's what's left of the version of her I used to know." I picked it up slowly. The paper felt strangely warm. There was no name on the front, no date. Just the faint scent of burnt something, maybe incense. Maybe a house fire. My fingers hesitated at the seal. I didn't want whatever was inside to be real. But I broke it open anyway. Inside were 3 things: an old Polaroid, a folded sheet of lined paper, and what looked like a flyer torn in half. I pulled out the photo first. It was of Mallory, younger, hair longer, messier, standing barefoot on some kind of cliff, smiling in that wild, reckless way I hadn't seen in years. And next to her, with an arm around her shoulder, was a man who wasn't Jared. He looked older, maybe 10 years her senior, with a tattoo down his arm and a cigarette in his hand. Her hand was on his chest. "That's not me," Jared said quietly, reading my mind. "That's Tate." "Tate?" I asked, already dreading the answer. The man she was with before me, before anyone, before her first real breakdown. The room seemed to close in a little. I opened the note next. Mallory's handwriting unmistakable. Sharp, tidy letters, like she was trying to control chaos. "If I disappear again, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I can't be fixed. I keep trying, and I keep breaking things instead. Tate says I should stop pretending. but I still want to believe I could be good for someone. Even if I'm not. If I leave, don't come looking. Please. Just let me go. There was no date. No signature. Just those sentences, as raw and cracked as they felt in my chest. And then I unfolded the torn flyer. It was for a cabin rental outside Red Hollow, a small town I remembered only because we drove through it once and she refused to stop. She said it gave her bad air. I remember laughing at the phrasing, but now it didn't feel funny. Now it felt like a warning. Mallory disappeared to that cabin once, Jared said, staring into nothing. Years ago. Said she needed clarity. I drove out there. I saw her. Through the window. But she didn't let me in. Tate was already there. She looked different. Like someone who didn't want to come back. So why are you showing me this now? I asked, throat dry. Why today? Jared leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I think she's going back. I blinked. What do you mean back? She just walked out. You think she's running again? Right now. She called me 2 days ago, he said. Said she was scared of herself. Said she didn't know if she could lie to you anymore. Said she was seeing someone again. And that this time, she didn't think she'd stop. He stood up and looked at the door where she had vanished minutes ago. She didn't just walk away, Emery. She was heading somewhere. You still think this is about me? I didn't answer. Because my mind had already raced ahead. Red Hollow. That cabin. And a part of me knew, even before I reached for my keys, that Mallory was no longer just lying. She was retreating. Back to a version of herself I never met. And maybe never should have. The last time I saw Mallory that night, her hair was tangled and she didn't have shoes on. That image stuck with me as I drove through the back roads heading toward Red Hollow, a name that felt fictional until my GPS showed the turnoff. Jared had left after dropping that final bombshell like it was a courtesy, like he was handing off some cursed torch and quietly exiting the narrative. I didn't stop him. I didn't say goodbye. I barely looked at him. The drive was long and oddly quiet. I turned off the music 10 minutes in. Nothing felt right. The night air pressed in around the car, thick and damp like it had weight. The closer I got to Red Hollow, the worse it felt. The trees leaned in. The road narrowed. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the realization that I was getting closer to something I wasn't supposed to see. The cabin wasn't listed on any modern site. I found it only because of the torn flyer, and even then, I had to cross-reference the cabin's landline area code to find a backroad map online. It sat alone, nearly swallowed by forest. It had no address, just a marker, Mason's Bend, Lot 17. When I finally pulled into the gravel path that led up to it, I expected silence. But there was music, soft, distant, distorted by the trees. A voice crooning something old, something vinyl and scratchy. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only real thing left. My thoughts were mud. Was I walking into an affair? A breakdown? A trap? I didn't know anymore. I just knew she was here, and I had to see her face when I asked why. I stepped out into the dark. The air smelled like pine and ashes, and something sweeter, faint, almost floral, that didn't belong out here. The cabin came into view slowly, half-collapsed porch, a window with soft orange light behind a ripped curtain. The music was definitely coming from inside. Some jazz track warbling from an old record. It was eerie, surreal, but I kept walking. I didn't knock. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open gently and stepped into a living room that hadn't seen life in a decade. Dust, candles, melted wax stains, an overturned photo frame on the mantel. There were no voices. No sounds except the record spinning lazily on a player in the corner. And then I saw her coat. Mallory's coat. The green one I hated. Draped over the back of a chair like it had just been peeled off. Her boots were on the mat. She was here. Somewhere in this house. Mallory. I called out, half whisper, half warning. No answer. I walked slowly down the narrow hall. First door, bathroom. Empty. Second, some kind of old supply room with tools and a rusty heater. The third was cracked open just enough for me to see candlelight flickering against the far wall. I pushed the door gently. She wasn't alone. She wasn't talking. She was sitting cross-legged on the wooden floor, barefoot, eyes red, mascara melted down her cheeks, facing a man whose back was to me. He didn't turn around. He just sat there with his arms resting on his knees like this was a ritual, like I was the one interrupting something sacred. I froze in the doorway. Mallory looked up, startled, and for a brief second, she looked like she didn't recognize me. Then her face twisted into something I'd never seen, not guilt, not shame, dread. Emery, she said. And the way she said my name didn't sound like a greeting. It sounded like a warning. The man finally turned. His face was older, weathered, covered in the kind of beard that said, "I don't care anymore." But there was something else in his eyes. Recognition. Not of me. Of her. "Tate," I muttered. He didn't answer. Mallory stood slowly, her hands trembling at her sides. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. "You don't understand what this is." I took a step in. "Then explain it." But she didn't. Instead, she looked at the old duffel bag sitting in the corner. My duffel bag. One I hadn't seen in years. Packed with clothes, photos, one of my old passports. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. Mallory hadn't come here to cheat. She'd come here to disappear. Again. Only this time, she was planning to take part of my life with her. I stood there, my mouth dry, staring at the bag like it might move. Like it might unzip itself and spill out a second life I never knew existed. It was definitely mine. My old leather duffel, the one I lost on a trip years ago and never thought about again. How had she found it? Why had she packed it here, of all places? My passport was inside, my spare wallet, photos I hadn't seen since my dad's funeral. I hadn't realized they were missing. Mallory's eyes shifted between me and the bag, like she was trying to figure out what I'd seen and how much I'd understood. But there wasn't anything subtle left. The room smelled like candle wax and fear. And the longer I stood there, the more I could feel something wrong humming underneath her silence. "What is this?" I asked, not yelling, because it didn't feel like yelling would help. It felt like we were standing on a ledge, and anything louder than a whisper might make it all collapse. "What are you doing, Mallory?" She opened her mouth, but Tate spoke first. "She didn't tell you anything," he said flatly. Of course she didn't. I looked at him. He wasn't threatening. He didn't seem violent. But there was a depth to his voice that told me he'd seen Mallory in ways I never had, and not just physically. His tone carried history, wounds, regret, and something darker. A calmness I didn't trust. "I don't know who the hell you are," I said, barely keeping my voice level. "But whatever this is, whatever you two think you're doing." "She was going to leave you," he interrupted. "Not for me. Not for anyone. Just gone. She was done." Mallory's hands clenched, but she didn't deny it. She just looked down at her bare feet, at the floorboards between us, as if she wanted them to swallow her whole. "I didn't want you to get hurt," she said finally. I laughed. It came out wrong, like I was choking. "So you were just going to steal my identity, vanish with my stuff, and pretend none of this ever happened?" "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "But then why was my birth certificate folded inside a notebook in that bag? Why were there old pay stubs in my name? Why did she have a copy of my signature?" "You weren't just leaving," I said slowly, the words coming together like a nightmare forming into shape. "You were erasing me." Silence. Mallory took a half step back. I needed a clean break. "You don't know what it's like, Emery. Living as someone you can't stand. Waking up every day pretending the life you built isn't suffocating you." I tried to fix it. I stayed longer than I should have. But I can't keep being someone's version of normal. Tate moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough to feel like a wall had gone up between us. "This was never about cheating," he said. "It was about escape." "Why take my things?" I asked. "Why make it look like I left too?" Mallory looked up, and this time, her face was stripped of every mask. No excuses. No tears. Just naked intention. "Because I knew you'd come looking. And if it looked like we both left, maybe they'd never follow." "They?" I repeated. "What are you talking about?" She bit her lip. Hesitated. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I didn't just lie to you, Emery. I lied to people who don't forgive. I thought I could run once. But the only way to disappear is to disappear with someone else's identity. Someone they'd never come after." My legs almost gave out. "Me," I said quietly. She nodded once. And in that moment, I realized Mallory wasn't afraid of me discovering the truth. She was afraid that by finding her, I just signed my name on the target she'd been dodging for years. I don't know what hit harder, the fact that she was willing to become me, or the fact that she believed someone would come for her, and that I'd make a better shield than a husband. I stood there, completely still, feeling the sharp edges of the past 6 years grinding in my skull. All the small moments that didn't make sense, the nights she stayed up late, the password she changed, the old storage unit she said held just junk from college. The weird fear in her eyes when a strange car parked outside our home. It was all part of a bigger shape I never saw forming. Tate walked past me without a word and knelt down by the far wall. He moved aside an old rug, then something clicked beneath the floor. A hidden hatch. A wooden panel lifted with a groan like it hadn't been opened in a decade. "What is this?" I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. Mallory didn't speak. She stayed pressed against the wall like she was trying to disappear into it. Tate opened the hatch fully and stepped aside so I could see. Inside wasn't deep, just a crawl space. But it was filled with boxes. Not the kind you'd find in a family attic. These were lined up with military precision. Sealed plastic tubs with duct tape across each lid, and writing in black marker. One box was labeled Cora. Another said Miles. Then another, Elijah, safe copy. I crouched down slowly, my hands shaky as I opened the first. Inside were driver's licenses. Dozens. All different names. All with Mallory's face, slightly changed each time. Different hair. Different ages. Some foreign, some local. Some expired. Some freshly printed. Jesus Christ, I breathed. They were all her, Tate said. Different versions. Different places. Different husbands, in at least 2 cases. I looked up at Mallory, horrified. "You married me under a fake name?" "No," she said, her voice thin. "Not fake. Just borrowed. Emery, I swear, you were the only one that felt real." "Don't do that," I snapped. "Don't twist this. You used me. You were going to vanish using my life like it was just another mask. I wasn't going to hurt you," she cried, stepping forward. "I was going to make it clean. You'd get an insurance payout, maybe. You'd be fine. I thought if I could do it fast, if I got the details right. You practiced this," I said. "You rehearsed what it would look like if I vanished. You spent years collecting this stuff." She didn't answer. "But Tate did. She started this a long time ago," he said. "Before you. Before me. I met her when she was someone else. Her real name probably isn't even Mallory. All I know is people started asking questions years back. One of them ended up dead in a hotel in Arizona. Another disappeared in a ferry fire. I felt my chest seize. She's dangerous," he added, "but only when she's cornered." Mallory's eyes flared. "You don't get to talk about danger, Tate. Not after what you did in Toronto." "You said you forgave me," he snapped back. "I had to. You were the only one left who knew the originals." I took a step back, away from both of them, trying to breathe through the panic building in my lungs. I wasn't just standing in front of a woman who lied. I was standing in front of someone who erased entire chapters of herself, who recycled identities like seasonal wardrobes, who maybe loved me, maybe didn't, who maybe never even existed in the way I thought. Then I saw something on the side of one of the boxes, a red tag. It said, "Activated June 10th, 25. Today's date." My hands trembled as I flipped the box open. Inside was my information. Not just a few copies. Everything. Bank statements. Tax records. Old voicemails from my mom. Even a photo of me as a child that I know I never gave her. She had recreated my digital life. Brick by brick. I turned back to her. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked genuinely afraid. "You weren't just going to disappear," I whispered. "You were going to let them think I did." She didn't deny it. And that's when the front door of the cabin creaked open. Heavy boots on old wood. And a voice, cold, sharp, unfamiliar, said, "You're early, Mallory." But she didn't turn around. She closed her eyes and whispered, "That's not who I called." The cabin door swung open slowly. The man who stepped in wasn't what I expected. No black suit, no gun, no sunglasses. Just a worn leather jacket, dirt on his boots, and eyes that didn't blink enough. He was older than both Tate and me. Weathered. Tired. He looked at Mallory the way a debt collector looks at an unpaid loan. Not angry, just patient. "I wasn't expecting you yet," he said quietly. Mallory didn't move. She stood frozen, her arms limp at her sides, her breath sharp and fast. "I didn't call you," she said again. "I called Jared." The man gave a slight, bitter smile. "Jared doesn't answer calls from ghosts anymore." Tate stepped forward, trying to position himself between Mallory and the door, but the man didn't even acknowledge him. Then his eyes flicked to me. "You must be the husband." I didn't answer. Not at first. My brain was running on fumes, every instinct telling me I shouldn't even be here. But I stood my ground. "She's done running," I said firmly, my voice louder than it had been all night. "You're not taking her anywhere." The man raised an eyebrow, amused. "Son, you think this is a rescue?" And then he did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. No gun. No threat. Just a document. He tossed it to the floor between us. "Her real name is on that, along with a full list of the identities she's used, countries she's crossed through, and 24 aliases linked to low-level scams, ID forgery, and a couple missing persons. Mallory flinched like the paper had teeth. I'm not law enforcement, he added. I used to be. Not anymore. Now I just clean up the mess people like her leave behind. Quietly. Then why are you here? I asked. Because the people she used to work with? He nodded toward the open hatch where the identity boxes still Saturday. They don't care about justice. They care about silence. I'm the in-between. I give people like her a choice. Mallory finally looked up. I'm not going with you. He shrugged. Then you'd better burn this place. Delete the backups. And pray you disappear clean. Because next time, someone's not going to knock. He looked back at me. She didn't lie about everything. You really did mean something to her. That's why you're still breathing. And then, just like that, he turned and walked out. No threats. No handcuffs. Just the sound of his boots fading into the trees. We didn't speak for a long time after that. Mallory sat down on the floor, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding in her own collapse. I stood by the door, unsure if I should feel relieved or enraged. Both emotions came and went in waves. Finally, she whispered, I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I replied. She nodded. I'll leave. For good this time. You can tell everyone I ran off. I'll make it look like I vanished. That you were the one left behind. But I shook my head. No. She looked at me surprised. No. I'm not letting you disappear like this. Not again. You want a clean break? Then make one. The real way. Turn it all in. Clear your name. Get help. Tell the truth. She looked down at her hands. What if there's nothing left of me to save? Then let someone else decide that for once, I said. In the end, she agreed. It didn't happen overnight. We burned the boxes together. She turned over the ID printer, the fake records, and the encrypted drives to Jared. Yes, he showed up. He had been watching, quietly, waiting for her to ask for help. Tate disappeared soon after. No contact. No goodbye. Just a note on the porch that said, we were all versions. Don't become one of mine. Mallory eventually gave a full statement through a private investigator who had worked with victims of identity theft. She didn't go to prison, but she did have to testify, anonymously, behind a screen, far from the courtroom. The organization she used to be part of? They were dismantled. Quietly. Not in headlines. But enough to end the threat. And me? I started over. I moved back to my hometown. Got a job restoring old furniture. Something simple. Something real. People started calling me reliable. That word meant more to me than any love ever had. Mallory sends letters sometimes. Never about us. Just postcards. No return address. I don't write back. But I don't throw them away either. The woman I married never existed. But I survived her. And somehow that's enough.